Hey there YouTube, hello knife people, I'm Joe, you're watching Ink&Iron, and today we are going to talk about the Spyderco Para 3 lightweight version. I've been carrying this at work for the last 2 to 3 weeks or so, and it's been a surprising performer, although I do have some interesting thoughts on it that you might enjoy. And just to show you what kind of weather I'm dealing with. Ooh yeah, it's nasty out. Alright, next time you see me, I'll be warm and cozy in my apartment and hopefully at my desk. Let's go. To get a good sense of the size of the Para 3, let's do a couple of size comparisons and I'll tell you a bit about this blade. So the Para 3's blade length is 3.2 inches, which is 83.3 millimeters, and I will roll in a card here in a second with all the specs. Here it is next to Paramilitary 2. You get about 2.6 inches of cutting edge, or 66.5 millimeters. This is the steel wheel cut jack. It seems to be a pretty good size comparison. The width of the blade, so like this dimension, is the same as the PM2 over here. It's 1.3 inches or 33.3 millimeters. I will be talking about that later because it's relevant to this review. The thickness of this blade. Oops. Meant to put it off screen. The thickness of this blade is 0.15 inches or 3.7 millimeters. That is thickness in this dimension. The stock right here is 3.7 millimeters. This is a Spyderco Native 5 Salt. I tried to choose other plastic handled knives to do size comparisons, and I'm just going to leave these here while you get the rest of the specs on a little thing I'm going to put together. Okay, now that you've got the full details, I'd like to go into a couple of my observations from using this knife. So the first one, this is going to relate to my tip up versus tip down carry video that features a, I think this Paramilitary 2, and I put like 2 pocket clips on it and talked about how to carry it. Anyway, the handle on this Para 3 is small enough, so I think you can see the handle is clearly smaller. When I go and reach into my pocket, I naturally land a little bit higher on this knife, and then all I have to do is stick a finger in and flick it out, and I'm there. Whereas the Paramilitary 2, I end up somewhere back here when I pull it out, and I have to scooch forward and flick out the blade. Now, your mileage may vary. I have about a medium-sized hand, and I am not plunging my hand into my pocket to grab my knife, so this is just, you know, my experience. It is easier to index on this smaller handle and know exactly where you are on the blade and how to get the blade out without as much fiddling as the PM2. That's just my experience. I wanted you to know. Second thing I would like to talk about is the steel. So this is CTS BD1N. Hopefully you can read that. This is sort of similar to VG10 or 14C28N in my experience. They're not the most premium steels, however they are very good performers. This is a very stainless steel. This has been exposed to solvents and, you know, water, you know, light splashing and whatnot, and it looks fine. You just wipe it off, blow it out, whatever you gotta do to keep it dry, and it should serve you pretty well. And it's actually a surprisingly edge retaining steel. I didn't measure exactly how far I cut through cardboard, but this has processed a heck of a lot of cardboard. Like right now it's not even close to shaving sharp. Not even. I have used this extensively, and it held an edge a lot longer than I thought it was going to. It's not quite like an S30V, and it's definitely not, you know, a Maximet. This is the Manix 2 and Maximet steel. It's certainly not a super steel, but for everyday tasks, I think it is definitely up to par. My next point here is gonna be about the handle. I was a little bit worried that this handle was gonna be uncomfortable because there are no liners, and so it's very thin. However, you can see that this is nicely rounded on its edges, unlike the Manix 2. Not to say the Manix 2 is uncomfortable, but it's definitely a little bit friendlier in the hand than the old style plastic molded handles. So I am glad to see some of this contouring come out of Spyderco, and I hope that they continue with this trend because it makes it much more comfortable to use this knife. Another thing I'd like to point out is that this is not a lefty friendly knife. This is very much for right-handed people. Now obviously you can switch the clip around. You know, we're pretty used to that with Spydercos. However, look how I disengage this lock with my right hand. You can see I have a thumb on one scale, I've got a couple of fingers on the opposite side, and then I have a free finger to operate the compression lock. See that? Okay, now, if I throw this into my left hand, let's say I'm, doing left-handed carry, whatever, to disengage this, I am inclined to put my thumb back here on the lock bar, and that leaves my grip on the knife up to the fingers on one scale and then just the thumb on the compression lock. Now, as I've said, I'm right-hand dominant, so if you're a lefty and you have a strategy for holding on to these little guys while you disengage the lock, please let me know. It's possible that if I got the clip on the other side, which I haven't done, that I could strategize and make this a little bit less sketchy to hold while I'm closing it. But as far as I can tell, this is pretty much how it's gonna go if you're a lefty, and I gotta say, it is not a very secure feeling knife in the hand, in my left hand anyway. So, your mileage may vary. Please give me some comments and let me know what you think about that. My next point requires the knife being closed. I just want you to see that it is the same height, as I said earlier, as the Paramilitary 2. However, I think the proportions of this knife just got a little bit weird. Like, it looks strangely wide in this dimension. Maybe it's just me. I like the ratio of the width to the overall length on the Paramilitary 2. I like it on the Manix 2. Not so much a fan here on the Para 3. This is kind of strange, and pulling it out of my pocket, I have a couple of times felt it sort of rubbing my pocket on the way out, and it's because I wasn't expecting this hugely pronounced spider hole hump here. So I think if we're gonna do maybe a future iteration that's a little slimmer, you could thin the blade stock and give us a little bit of a lower hump here. Like, just make a smaller hole. That's all you had to do. Because this is a light use knife, in my opinion. I don't think you're using it as hard as a PM2. So you might as well make it a little bit sleeker, a little bit slimmer in the pocket, a little easier to carry, since we're trying to hit that EDC market with this smaller blade format. Also, the proportions make cutting performance slightly weirder, and it's mostly at the tip. So check out these tips. It might be hard to tell, but the PM2 on the right hand side narrows down more gradually, which makes sense, right? Because if we line up the spider holes here, it has to come to a point more abruptly on the Para 3 on the left. And so you get a less gradual taper towards the tip. And what I have to say about that is this tip is much better at slicing and doing fine work than this one. Because if we go back a little ways on this, you can see the stock's still thin. If we go back the same distance, we're a little bit thicker. So this knife thickens up during a cut much faster than the PM2. I ended up kind of pushing through a lot of cardboard rather than actually cutting and slicing it. So yeah, again, I would thin the stock on this to make it a better slicing performer, rather than just an homage to the larger versions of this knife. But that's just me. And then one final note here. This is sort of a personal observation, and I'm sure won't be a deal breaker for many people besides me. I mean, it's not quite a deal breaker. Anyway, the Para 3 doesn't shake out like the PM2, and let me just show you what I mean. So let me try and show this to you. I'm going to flick this blade out. There we go. So that motion is a twist and a flick outwards. There we go. And the blade comes flying out. Now, when you go to do that with the Para 3, this is pretty much what you're going to end up doing. The problem here is the length of the blade. You do not have enough steel at this end to gain that momentum and overcome the detent and deploy the blade. So, not a huge problem. I'm sure most of you are like, hey Joe, that seems like a you problem. And you're probably right about that. Okay, final thoughts here. The Para 3 is a pretty nice knife to carry in the pocket. However, it does seem to favor right-handers rather than left-handers, so sorry lefties. The blade steel is not the most premium steel, but it is a very good performer, and I would have to recommend it, honestly. It's fairly easy to sharpen. It's fairly straightforward. I live in Colorado, so I don't have to like oil my blades, which is why all mine look not super greasy. They are dirty sometimes. It's a decent pocket clip. It's the Spyderco deep carry clip. It rides pretty well. No real complaints there. The lack of liners I don't think is a problem. It makes the knife as light as it is. That's 2.4 ounces or 68.5 grams. It doesn't exactly disappear in a pocket because of the sort of chunky old spider hole area right here. So that could be improved in my mind, but I don't know if Spyderco will ever care to thin down the stock and give us a narrower blade on this one. I mostly bought this knife for size comparison purposes, which is sad to say a little bit. However, I was surprised at the performance. For its price point around $90, exact monetary value down here, around 90 bucks, you have quite a bit of competition. I don't know that I would recommend the Para 3. Heck, if you could get a Para 2 on the secondhand market for like 90 something bucks, I would definitely go with that. It just feels like a knife that I didn't necessarily need to add to my collection. It's not adding any staggering new cool features really. It's just sort of a refinement on what Spyderco really enjoys doing, which is light plastic handled knives and things with the name military in them. So for me, I don't know that I would recommend it necessarily, but the Para 3 is an apt daily user knife. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave it up to you. I've given you my thoughts. So if you have qualms, questions, comments, put them down in the comments section, please. I like to get feedback. I'm trying not to make terrible videos forever. All right, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Feel free to subscribe to the channel for more content. I also collect fountain pens. Pens, cool. So if you're into EDC gear and unboxing and all that kind of thing, I do those as well. I have been Joe. You have been watching Ink&Iron. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you give serious consideration to the Para 3. Some of you probably won't go for it. Some of you probably will. And yeah, I think that's fine. I think it's a decent knife for the money. Although I think you can get better value out of some other things. Anyway, thanks for watching everyone. I'll catch you on my next video.